Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into something pretty staggering, actually. It's a statistic about Japan's labor market that really highlights a huge structural issue. The incredible number of temporary staffing agencies. I mean, they are just everywhere.
Yeah, it's way more than just a big number, isn't it? It really points to some deeper shifts in how employment works there and in the management culture, too. So our goal today is basically to unpack why this explosion. We'll look at the company side, the financial reasons, and also why workers choose this path.
And the structural differences, too.
Exactly. The system itself, how it compares internationally, and maybe touch on what could actually be done to make things, well, healthier.
Okay, let's start with that scale then, because I think,
Yeah.
you listening need to get a sense of just how massive this really is. The research we looked at, it shows that back in 2021, Japan had 42,448 registered temporary staffing agency locations.
42,448. It's a shocking number on its own. But maybe even more startling is how fast it grew. Japan was already kind of an outlier.
Way ahead. Yeah.
Right. Back in 2006, they had around 30,600. Now, compare that to the U.S., maybe 6,000 locations then, or the U.K., about 10,500. So Japan was already miles ahead, and then it just surged, adding almost 12,000 more since then.
Okay, and here's the comparison that really brings it home for me, makes it feel real.
Mm.
That number, over 42,000, it's almost the same as the total number of convenience stores across the whole country. The konbini.
Which are everywhere.
Exactly. Usually around 55, 56,000. So think about that density. You see a convenience store on practically every other block. Staffing agencies are nearly that common in the business landscape. So if the market is that saturated with supply, there must be just unbelievable demand. What's driving that from the corporate side?
Well, the biggest driver is probably what you'd expect. Cost cutting. It's just this relentless push from companies to slash labor costs wherever they can. And using temporary workers is just, well, an incredibly easy way to get staff at lower wages.
And a big part of that cost saving starts with the law itself.
Right.
There's this idea of equal pay for equal work. That principle exists technically.
It does exist on paper, yes. But the enforcement, well, that's where it seems to fall apart completely. The reality on the ground is that a dispatched worker, someone sent by an agency, is almost always paid less.
Yeah.
Sometimes significantly less than a permanent employee doing the exact same job in the same company.
How does that work mechanically?
The company pays a fee to the agency. The agency takes its slice, its margin, and then the worker gets what's left over, which is often way below what a full-time permanent person would earn for that role.
So right off the bat, the company saves money, less pay for the same work. That's hugely appealing, obviously. But hang on, you mentioned this gets deeper. Is it just the wage difference, or are companies avoiding other maybe much bigger financial hits here?
Ah, yes. That is absolutely the crucial part. They're escaping the massive burden of social insurance contributions. See, when the client company pays the staffing agency, that payment often gets recorded in their books, not as wages, but as a materials expense.
A materials expense.
Right.
For people. Why does that specific accounting trick matter so much?
Because it opens up this enormous financial loophole. If you pay actual employee wages, that triggers really hefty employer contributions, for national health insurance, pensions, unemployment insurance. That's a huge cost burden for the company.
A really significant percentage on top of salary.
Exactly. But if they classify the payment to the agency as just buying a material or a service, the client company basically sidesteps that entire employer contribution. It's gone.
So the client pushes that liability onto the staffing agency instead and saves potentially tens of thousands per worker every year just on those contributions. It basically turns labor into just another line item, like buying widgets.
Precisely. The financial incentive is just immense. And then you add the flexibility factor on top of that. Japanese labor law is famously quite protective of permanent employees. It makes it really difficult and expensive to legally let someone go once they're hired full-time.
Right. Lifetime employment used to be the norm, and while that's changing, the legal protections are still strong.
Very strong. So temporary staff become this essential release valve.
Yeah, makes sense.
If the economy dips or a big project suddenly ends or demand just shifts, the company can just cut back on its dispatched workers. There's minimal legal risk, minimal cost compared to laying off permanent staff. It gives them this agility that's really hard to achieve otherwise.
Okay, so the picture for the company side is crystal clear. Save money on wages, dodge huge insurance costs, and get flexibility to scale up or down easily. But that brings us to the other side of the coin, the worker paradox. If temp work often means lower pay, less security, why are so many people, especially maybe younger workers, actually choosing this route?
It's a really powerful indicator of the state of the wider corporate world there, I think. For a lot of workers, choosing temp work isn't really a first choice, like a career goal. It's more of a defensive move. It's about avoiding risk, trying to find some kind of refuge from what gets called black corporate culture.
Okay, black corporate culture. What does that actually mean in practice? What are people trying so hard to escape?
Well, we're talking about work environments that are known for specific kinds of, frankly, abuses, things like mandated overtime that's often extreme and sometimes just unpaid. Power harassment for managers is a big one.
Bullying, basically.
Yeah, pervasive bullying or unreasonable demands, and also constant pressure to do tasks way outside your actual contract or job description. You know, that infamous expectation that you'll just do anything and everything the company needs, no matter the personal cost.
Wow, that sounds utterly draining. So the hope then is that the temporary contract acts like a sort of shield against all that.
That's the idea, yeah. The hope is that the contract will clearly spell out the job, the hours, like you're here 9 to 5 to work on Project X, and that's it. Workers hope that because they're technically employed by the agency, that third party provides a kind of legal clarity, a separation that protects them from those endless, often unreasonable demands that permanent staff might face.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense as a strategy for self-preservation. But here's where it gets really ironic based on the research. We know there's been this boom in companies offering retirement proxy services, right?
Yes, that's right. These are actual businesses people pay money to. Well, to quit their job for them. So they don't have to have that final difficult conversation with their boss or go through what can be a really drawn out, painful resignation process.
The fact that service even exists tells you a lot about power dynamics in some workplaces.
It absolutely does. But here's the kicker, the really profound twist. Guess which industry is one of the biggest customers for these retirement proxy services?
No, don't tell me.
It's the staffing industry itself.
Wait, seriously. So the temporary workers, the ones who maybe went to these agencies to escape toxic workplaces, they are now so desperate to leave the agencies that they're paying someone else to quit for them.
That's the stark reality, yes. It strongly suggests that this temporary staffing sector, the very one that promises clearer boundaries and protection, has itself become riddled with the exact same toxic culture. The pressure, the harassment that people were trying to get away from in the first place.
Right.
Quality control, ethical standards, they seem to be failing badly across large parts of the industry.
Which leads us straight into the next big question. The third systemic driver. Why are there so many of them? 42,000 agencies. That kind of market saturation just screams low barrier to entry.
Exactly right. Think about starting, say, a restaurant. You need a huge amount of capital up front, right?
Yeah.
Kitchen gear, the space itself, licenses, food inventory. It's massive. Now, what do you need to start a staffing agency?
A phone, an internet connection, maybe an office address.
Pretty much, yeah. You need the official permission, the license, but the actual overhead is minimal. A tiny office space, maybe just a desk and a phone line. Compared to almost any other kind of physical business, the initial capital needed is practically zero.
And the inevitable consequence of making it that easy to just hang out a shingle.
You get chaos. You get this huge explosion of tiny, often very short-lived firms. The sources describe it as a kind of random, highly competitive, low-quality market. It becomes incredibly hard to enforce consistent quality or ethical labor practices or maintain any kind of high standard when the regulators are trying to oversee tens of thousands of these micro-businesses, many with barely any capital.
Okay, so we've painted a picture with some pretty serious structural problems. But we should also acknowledge staffing firms do exist everywhere because they serve a real purpose, right?
Okay.
What's the actual positive function here?
Absolutely. That's our driver for getting specialized skills quickly. A good, reputable agency allows a client company to bring in very specific niche expertise almost immediately. Maybe it's a programmer with a rare skill or a highly specialized accountant for a short-term project.
So it boosts agility.
Definitely. It boosts agility and it saves the company the enormous time and expense of having to recruit and train that specialist internally, especially if they only need them for a limited time.
So yeah, specialized temporary workers are genuinely needed. But the data also seems to flash a warning sign back at the workers in this system, doesn't it?
It really does. To stay valuable within this temporary framework, particularly as you get older, you absolutely have to keep upskilling. You need to deepen your professional specialization constantly. The opportunities apparently shrink quite dramatically for temporary workers who don't continuously invest in having those highly in-demand specialized skills. Without that edge, you risk becoming disposable.
And that whole idea of specialization brings us to maybe the most crucial structural point,
Yeah.
how the Japanese system is fundamentally different from how things often work overseas.
Yeah.
It comes down to who controls the worker's tasks, right?
Yes, this is absolutely critical to understand. In the main Japanese system, the client company, the one actually using the labor directly, tells the dispatched worker what to do minute by minute. It's like they're renting a person and managing their daily tasks just like they would an internal employee, even though that person is technically employed by the agency.
Okay, how's that different from what we might normally call outsourcing or contracting?
Well, true international outsourcing, or what's sometimes called contracting for a defined result, works very differently. In that model, the client pays the contracting firm for a finished service or a specific outcome. The contracting firm itself is then responsible for managing its own staff, deciding who does the work, how they do it, their schedules, their methods.
Can you give us a quick example, like how does my interaction as a client change?
Sure. Let's say you hire a true outsourced IT support company. You tell them, we need this new security patch rolled out across all 500 of our workstations by Friday end of day. The IT firm then figures out how to do it, which technicians work on it, their process. But if you use the Japanese temporary dispatch system for an IT worker, you might be telling that individual worker, okay, stop working on that server config now. I need you to go check the logs on server A immediately. And after that, can you go fix the paper jam in the third floor printer? You're directly managing their individual actions moment by moment.
Ah, I see. So the client gets total control, maximum flexibility, without actually taking on the full responsibility or the legal status of being the employer. And it sounds like that very structure, that control mechanism, might be what blocks career progression for these workers.
It seems to be a major factor, yes. We see successful models elsewhere. You mentioned large contract research organizations in places like India. The contracting firm often manages a whole career path for its employees, including things like clear progression, training, even handling maternity leave smoothly. Or in Europe and the US, it's not uncommon for really good recent graduates working as contractors at a big company to get hired on permanently by that client company.
But that pathway seems much harder, almost systematically blocked in Japan. Why is that?
Well, the sources we looked at point to a couple of big reasons stemming from this structure. First, evaluation systems are often really opaque, not transparent at all. So if a temporary worker does an absolutely fantastic job, they often have no clear way to prove that value objectively. The client company's internal performance review systems might just not apply to them, or the criteria aren't shared. If you don't know how you're being judged, it's really hard to make a case for a permanent job.
Right. No visibility means no upward mobility.
Pretty much. And the second issue is just a general reluctance from the corporations. Because the worker is technically employed by this outside agency, companies are often really hesitant to give them core strategic responsibilities or access to sensitive information or put them in high-level roles. Their status as a dispatched worker itself seems to act as a kind of permanent barrier, keeping them at arm's length no matter how skilled or how well they perform.
So the very structure that gives the client control also keeps the worker in this sort of perpetual second tier, locking out even high performers from real advancement.
Yeah, it inhibits their full integration into the team and the company's work, and it just creates this unnecessary friction, which of course brings us to the crucial final part. What can actually be done? What are the concrete structural changes needed to fix this system?
Okay, so the solutions proposed seem to target those root causes we've discussed. Proposal 1 goes right for that big financial incentive, the accounting trick. Unify the social insurance systems like health and pension. Maybe move towards a model where contributions are tied to the individual worker, not the employer's classification.
Exactly. The idea is if all labor cost triggers similar, unavoidable financial burdens for the company, regardless of whether they call the worker staff or materials, then that huge financial advantage of using the temporary system just disappears. It removes the core incentive to game the system for cost savings.
Then Proposal 2 hits the wage issue directly. Really implement and strictly enforce equal pay for equal work. If companies genuinely can't save money just by paying a temporary worker less for doing the exact same job under their direct supervision, then a primary reason for choosing temps over permanent staff just evaporates.
Makes sense. Third, tackle that quality crisis in the market, the chaos of having 42,000 mostly tiny agencies. The focus needs to shift towards strengthening the staffing firms themselves, maybe through stricter regulation, maybe incentives, but getting them to act less like simple body shops just placing people and more like real career development partners for their workers. That means seriously beefing up their career support function.
Helping workers with skills, planning, progression.
Right. And finally, to fix those blocked career paths and the lack of integration, Proposal 4 is all about transparency. Introduce clear, objective, performance-based evaluation systems. Make assessment based on merit, on actual achievements. That way, high-performing temporary workers have a visible, achievable path towards permanent employment if they demonstrate their value.
Okay, so making the assessment objective and the pathway clear.
Yeah, it's vital if you want to actually retain talented people and truly leverage the specialized skills these agencies are supposed to be providing in the first place.
So wrapping this up, our deep dive really shows that this explosion in temporary staffing isn't just some simple economic trend. It's this really complex mix, isn't it? Corporate cost-cutting driven by loopholes, workers acting defensively against toxic work cultures, and all of it made worse by, frankly, systemic failures in regulation and enforcement.
Exactly. And when you look globally, you see that specialized, flexible temporary work is actually essential for a modern, agile economy. So the real question isn't about eliminating this type of work altogether. It's more about asking, should the focus be entirely on fixing the system? Could implementing things like transparent evaluations and building real career support into the agencies transform temporary work from being seen as this defensive second-class option into a genuinely respected professional pathway for specialists, much like we see in some successful overseas examples?
A fascinating question to leave our listeners with. Thank you for that deep dive.
My pleasure.